You think reacting makes you powerful. It doesn't. The moment you stop responding, that's when everything changes. Most people believe power comes from saying the right words, defending their position, or winning the argument. But the truth is, the more you talk, the more you reveal, and the more you reveal, the more control you give away. People expect reactions. They expect you to explain yourself, to chase clarity, to prove your worth. And the moment you play that role, you lose the upper hand without even realizing it. Silence disrupts expectations. It creates a psychological gap that the other person cannot easily fill. When you choose not to respond, not to argue, not to defend, you force them into a space where they have to think and overthink. They start questioning what went wrong, what you're thinking, and why you didn't react the way they anticipated. That's where your power begins to grow because silence isn't empty, it's loaded, it communicates confidence. It signals that you're not emotionally dependent on the outcome. It shows that you're not desperate for validation, approval, or understanding. And that alone makes people see you differently. You become someone who is in control, someone who doesn't need to prove anything to anyone. When you remove your reaction, you also remove their leverage. Arguments need two people. Drama needs participation. Emotional games require engagement. But when you step back and offer nothing, the entire dynamic collapses. Suddenly, they are left alone with their own behavior, their own words, and their own consequences. And here's the deeper truth: silence protects your energy. Not every situation deserves your voice. Not every person deserves your explanation. When you respond to everything, you drain yourself trying to control outcomes that were never yours to control in the first place. But when you choose silence, you choose peace, you choose clarity, you choose strength. People often underestimate this because it feels passive. It feels like you're doing nothing. But in reality, you're doing the hardest thing, mastering your emotions. Anyone can react, anyone can lash out. But it takes real discipline to stay calm, to hold your ground, and to walk away without saying a word. And the irony is, the less you say, the more they feel, the less you react, the more they think about you. The silence echoes louder than any argument ever could, because in the end, silence isn't weakness, it's controlled power. What most people don't realize is that the real punishment isn't what you say, it's what you stop giving your attention, your presence, your energy. The moment you withdraw those things, the dynamic shifts in a way words never could. People get used to access, they get used to knowing you'll respond, that you'll be there, that no matter what happens, you'll engage. And over time, that access becomes something they take for granted, not because they're evil, but because human nature adapts quickly to consistency. What is always available starts to feel less valuable. So when you suddenly go silent, when you stop feeding that connection, it doesn't just confuse them, it unsettles them because now something that felt guaranteed is no longer certain. And uncertainty creates tension. It makes them think about you more than your presence ever did. You have to understand attention is one of the most powerful currencies in human interaction. Where you place it determines what grows. When you keep giving it to someone who disrespects you, ignores you, or undervalues you, you're reinforcing that behavior. You're teaching them that no matter how they act, they still get access to you. But when you take that away, you break the pattern. Now they don't just notice your absence, they feel it. They start replaying conversations, analyzing their actions, wondering what changed. And in that space, they begin to confront something they avoided before, the possibility that they lost something real. This is why saying nothing and walking away hits deeper than any emotional reaction ever could. Words can be argued with, emotions can be dismissed. But absence is undeniable. It creates a void that can't be debated or explained away. And here's where most people get it wrong. They think this is about punishing the other person. It's not. It's about respecting yourself. It's about recognizing that your energy is not something to be handed out endlessly, especially where it's not valued. When you walk away without explaining, without chasing closure, without trying to fix everything, you're making a statement not to them, but to yourself. You're saying, I don't need to convince anyone of my worth. I don't need to fight for basic respect. That kind of mindset changes everything because now your actions are no longer driven by emotion, they're driven by standards, and standards create boundaries. Boundaries are what separate people who are constantly drained from those who are in control of their lives. When you have them, you don't need to argue, you don't need to prove a point. You simply remove yourself from anything that doesn't align. That's why silence feels so powerful, because it's backed by a decision to no longer tolerate what you once accepted. And the moment you truly understand that, walking away won't feel like a loss anymore. It will feel like taking your power back. The hardest part about walking away isn't losing the other person, it's controlling yourself in the moments when everything inside you wants to reach out. That urge to check your phone, to reread old messages, to break the silence just to feel some kind of connection again. That's where most people fail, not because they're weak, but because they're not prepared for how intense that internal battle really is. You see, attachment doesn't disappear just because you decide to walk away. The emotions, the memories, the habits, they're still there pulling at you. And your mind will try to justify breaking your own boundary. It will tell you things like, maybe just one message won't hurt, or what if they're waiting for you to say something? But what it's really doing is trying to bring you back to what feels familiar, even if that familiarity was unhealthy. This is where discipline becomes more important than emotion, because if you act based on how you feel in the moment, you'll always go back to the same cycle. You'll reopen doors that should have stayed closed. And every time you do that, you don't just lose progress, you weaken your own self respect. You teach yourself that your decisions don't hold weight when emotions get involved. But when you hold the line, when you feel that urge and choose not to act on it, something powerful starts to happen. You begin to build control over yourself. And that control is what creates real confidence, not the kind that comes from validation, but the kind that comes from knowing you can trust your own decisions. At first, it's uncomfortable. Silence feels heavy. Your mind races. You question whether you're doing the right thing. But over time, that intensity fades. The urge becomes weaker. The need for their response, their attention, their presence, it starts to lose its grip on you. And that's when the shift happens. You stop thinking about what they're doing and you start focusing on yourself again. Your energy, which was once tied to them, comes back to you. You begin to see things more clearly, not through emotion, but through perspective. You recognize what you tolerated, what you ignored, and what you truly deserve. This is the stage where most people would have gone back before. But if you make it through this phase, you come out different, stronger, more grounded, less reactive, and here's the irony: the moment you genuinely detach, when you no longer feel the need to reach out or check in, that's often when the other person starts to feel your absence the most. Because now it's not a game, it's not temporary silence, it's real. But by that point, it's no longer about them because you've already won the part that matters. You've gained control over yourself. What most people don't realize is that silence isn't just about distance, it's about what that distance forces the other person to feel. When you stop explaining, stop chasing, stop reacting, you remove the emotional safety net they were unconsciously relying on, and suddenly they're left alone with their own thoughts. Before, whenever tension built up, you were there to fix it. You reached out, you clarified, you tried to smooth things over, you made it easy for them to avoid accountability because your presence kept resetting the emotional balance. But when you go silent, that reset button disappears. Now they have to sit with the absence. And absence is powerful because it creates contrast. When you were always there, your value became normal, predictable, expected. But once that presence is gone, the mind starts to replay everything differently. Moments that were once overlooked begin to feel significant. Conversations that seemed small suddenly carry weight. Your consistency, your attention, your energy, it all becomes visible only after it's no longer available. This is where emotional tension begins to grow because people are wired to notice what they're losing more than what they have. And when there's no new interaction to distract them, their mind fills in the gaps. They start asking questions. Why did they really walk away? Are they moving on? Did I misjudge their value? These questions don't come from you chasing, they come from your absence creating uncertainty. And uncertainty is what triggers attraction on a deeper level. Not because you're playing a game, but because you've stepped out of the dynamic that made things easy and predictable. You've disrupted the pattern. And in that disruption, you forced a shift in perception. They no longer see you as someone who will always be there no matter what. They start to see you as someone who can leave and mean it. That realization changes everything. Because now it's not about you trying to prove your worth. It's about them recognizing it on their own. And the more they sit in that space without access to you, the more their emotional investment begins to rise. Not because you said something, because you didn't. But here's the key: this only works if your silence is real. If you're constantly checking their social media, waiting for a sign, hoping they'll reach out, then internally you're still attached. And that energy shows in your actions the moment you break silence too early. The power of this phase comes from genuinely letting go of the need to control the outcome. Because when your silence comes from strength, not strategy, it hits differently. And that's when emotional distance stops being a loss and starts becoming your advantage. There comes a point where the real shift happens, not in what you do, but in what you stop needing. Because the moment you no longer feel the urge to check your phone, to wonder what they're thinking, to replay every memory in your head, that's when you've crossed into a different level of power. Most people think detachment is about making the other person feel something. But real detachment is when you're no longer controlled by what they feel at all. It's when their presence doesn't elevate you and their absence doesn't break you. And ironically, that's exactly when they begin to feel your loss the most. Because now your energy has changed. Before, there was a subtle pull coming from you. Even if you tried to hide it, there was still a part of you hoping, waiting, expecting. And people can sense that even if they can't explain it, it makes them feel like they still have access to you, like you're still emotionally available whenever they decide to come back. But when that energy disappears, something shifts on their side. They start to feel the disconnect. Not because you told them anything, but because they can no longer feel you reaching for them. There's no invisible thread tying you to them anymore. And that absence of emotional availability creates a kind of pressure they didn't feel before. Now they're the one wondering. Now they're the one questioning, because when someone who used to care deeply suddenly becomes neutral, calm, and unbothered, it forces a confrontation with reality. They can no longer rely on your feelings to validate their importance. They have to face the possibility that they've lost someone who once valued them, and that loss becomes heavier the more real your detachment becomes. And here's where most people mess up: they think they need to show this detachment. They try to act cold, post certain things, or send indirect signals, but that's not detachment, that's performance. And performance always leaks neediness underneath. Real detachment is quiet. It's not about proving anything. It's not about making them notice. It's about genuinely moving forward with your life in a way that doesn't revolve around them anymore. You're focused on your goals, your growth, your peace. You're building something that doesn't depend on their presence. And that kind of energy can't be fake, because when it's real, it shows up in how you respond or don't respond. It shows up in your patience, your boundaries, your lack of urgency. You're no longer reacting from emotion. You're choosing from clarity. That's what makes it powerful. Because now, if they come back, it's not because you chased them, it's because they felt the shift, they felt the absence, they recognized the value they took for granted, and more importantly, they saw that you didn't need them to move forward. And when someone realizes they're no longer needed, that's when they start wanting you the most. So stay in that space and let your silence speak for you. At the end of all of this, the final level most people never reach is acceptance without attachment. Not the kind where you pretend you've moved on, but the kind where you genuinely make peace with whatever happens next. Whether they come back or disappear forever, it no longer defines your emotional state. And that's the moment where everything changes, because now your life is no longer paused waiting for someone else to decide your worth. You see, the strongest position you can ever stand in is when you're okay either way. If they return, you're not desperate, you're selective. If they don't, you're not broken, you're focused. That balance creates a presence that is calm, grounded, and incredibly rare. Most people operate from fear of losing, fear of being alone, fear of not being enough. But when you let go of that fear, your entire energy shifts into something unshakable. And this is where the real transformation happens, not just in how they see you, but in how you see yourself. Because now you're no longer trying to win someone back. You're no longer trying to prove your value. You're no longer overanalyzing every little thing. Instead, you're living your life on your terms. You're building discipline, improving your mindset, and creating a life that feels fulfilling regardless of who's in it. That kind of self focused is something powerful. It removes emotional dependency. And when you're no longer dependent, You become magnetic in a completely different way, not because you're trying to attract attention, but because your life has direction, stability, and purpose. People are naturally drawn to those who don't seek validation because it signals strength and confidence on a deeper level. Now, if they happen to reappear, they're stepping into a completely different version of you, someone who has boundaries, someone who isn't easily impressed, someone who values their time and energy. And that forces them to either rise to your level or realize they no longer have access to you the way they once did. But here's the key: you're not doing this for that outcome. You're doing this because you've chosen yourself, because at some point you realize that chasing someone who can walk away from you isn't strength, it's self abandonment. And walking away from that pattern is what restores your power. It's what rebuilds your confidence. It's what creates a version of you that doesn't settle for uncertainty or inconsistency. And once you reach that point, something interesting happens. You stop caring about the outcome and start valuing the process. You enjoy your growth, you respect your journey, you protect your peace. And from that place, everything you attract moving forward, whether it's them or someone new, will be aligned with who you've become, not who you used to be. So don't rush the process, don't fake the mindset, and don't look back hoping for validation. Just keep moving forward until your peace becomes stronger than your past.